Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Former Vice President Joe Biden has maintained a nearly 2-to-1 advantage on the airwaves for months. His dominance is most pronounced in three critical swing states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, where he spent about $53 million to Mr. Trump's $17 million over the past month, largely on ads, assailing the president's handling of the virus, as well as the economy and taxes, according to data from advertising analytics and ad tracking firm. That's an excerpt from a New York Times article that breaks down spending throughout these various states. Now, keep in mind, folks, these spending numbers, right? These aren't up for debate. This is the situation. However, the bigger question behind all of this is, does any of it really matter? Could any of it actually make a difference? Or does President Trump or former Vice President Joe Biden already have the election locked up and in the bank for them? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll break down the advertising, get to whether or not any of it makes a difference. And if it doesn't make a difference, or if it does, what could either candidate still do between now and Election Day, if anything, to affect the outcome of the election? But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on all things politics without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, there's a lot to talk about here because you have the year 2020 and it's all different. Historically, the candidate in whatever the race was, we could look and the trend shows that whatever candidate spends the most money typically wins. And secondly, whoever is the most negative usually wins. And there are a lot of things to talk about, and the fact that Donald Trump doesn't believe in spending money, usually because he doesn't have it, but he likes the rallies and all of those kinds of things. So it's an interesting question, and I guess let's go ahead and jump into it, and we'll share our views as we continue down this road.
So when we look here, Lance, and we get started right on weekly spending on TV ads in critical battleground states. Now, if you all want to follow along, this article is linked at thestateofus.org, thestateofus.org. You can find it there because we have a lot of charts today and graphs. Do we remember the distinction? The Devon creature's already given me a look like, don't start in explaining this. So, but anyway, for those of you that are longtime listeners, hopefully you can remember the difference. But I implore people to take a look at this if you have time, because it does do a nice job of kind of showing a couple of things here, Lance. The takeaways for me before we get into the specifics, right, are two things. One is the places where the spending was either equal or where Trump was in front of Biden earlier in the year, and now that's flipped. And specifically, if we look at a couple of states, Minnesota is one where early Trump was spending a few million and Biden was essentially spending nothing. Wisconsin, again, was one where they were both spending, but Trump was spending a little bit more. Georgia, Trump still is spending more than Biden, but Biden has closed that gap significantly. And Ohio is a place where we see early on Biden was, again, spending nothing, and Trump at several points was spending a couple million. And now Biden is way surpassing Trump, with Trump almost spending nothing. So there's a few different places there, and Iowa, I guess, is another one. So Wisconsin, Minnesota, Georgia, Ohio, and Iowa are places where either Trump was spending more initially and now Biden is outspending him, or the spending is almost even. And it's kind of interesting that Trump was opting to spend that money early on, but in some cases like Ohio, looks like he's almost spending nothing now.
Biden has a lot of money left and Trump doesn't. So you have that as part of that equation, is that the Democrats have a lot more money to spend right now. They've been collecting money strongly throughout the second and third quarter here. And if you've got the money, I guess you should spend it. The president doesn't have as much money in his campaign. And so I think that's the biggest reason. And he's using that money to do what he wants to do. And he doesn't like to be on TV ads. His strategy in 2016 was to hold lots of rallies and to get people to think that his opponent needs to be put in jail. And if we follow the news these days, he's following the same pattern. So he's using the pattern that won the election for him in 2016. And that wasn't to spend a lot of money buying TV ads because he didn't have a lot of money back then. I think what we see is different from this election than 2016 is the president's doing the same thing that he did in 2016. But the Democrats under Biden are taking a totally different tact than what Hillary Clinton did. Hillary Clinton pulled her money out of some of these key states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin because she thought she had it wrapped up and went after other states to try to have a bigger victory. And Justin, you've made that well known as in other shows talking about how you thought the Democrats messed up in 2016. And now this time Biden's taking the money and saying, you know what? We're going to keep pounding it in these states and keep spending it. And because I have enough money, I'm going to go after states like Ohio that were off the board, North Carolina that looked like they were off the board, Arizona looked like they were off the board, Iowa that looked like they were off the board. And so he is keeping up, his campaign is keeping the spending up in those battleground states and has enough money left over to go spend in those states that, or counties particularly. That's what I found interesting. We're not looking at state spending. They know information now. They're targeting counties that were flipped. And I think that's, to me, as a political junkie, that's the part that's cool, is it's not just going after a state, but they're micromanaging their money and buying ads in certain markets where they think they have a chance to gain a few votes. So that's what I see. So, I mean, it's a big deal on one hand because, oh, look, he's outspending him in a historical context. Spending more money means you usually win the election, but you're running against a candidate who in the last election didn't spend a lot of money.
Spent less.
That they have a different strategy. So how big of an issue is this really in my mind? So what do you think?
Well, I think, Lance, it's well taken, right? That obviously 2016, Hillary Clinton spent more money than Donald Trump. And so it's easy to say, right, that yes, generally speaking, the candidate that spends more money more often than not. But I think that's an important thing to break down in itself. When we say more often than not, we're not talking about 90% of the time. There's actually a nice piece on Netflix right now called Whose Vote Counts Explained. And it almost feels like, Lance, they heard our episode on the Electoral College and decided to build off of that and do a 3-part series. But it's real good. It's short. Each episode's under 30 minutes. And one of the things that they talk about in there is that very idea of, can you buy an election? And the answer is sort of yes and no, right? Yes, more often than not, the candidate that spends more wins more often than not. But it's not terribly unusual for something like 2016 to happen where the candidates didn't spend. I mean, we're not talking about, one candidate spent $1 billion and the other candidate spent nothing. We're talking about, maybe 100 million or 200 million, or so, split between candidates. The other thing is, though, that the untold story, right, of 2016, or I guess better understood now, is that even though Trump didn't outspend Hillary Clinton, he probably still had more airtime than she did. So even though he didn't have to spend money for it, he got more coverage than she did. And there's nothing like free coverage. And that, I think, is a huge part of that story, because if you added up the dollar value of the airtime that Trump got, right, versus Hillary free airtime, he way outspent her then. I mean, if you had paid for that airtime, oh my gosh, he probably outspent her 2-1, right? So just because he got it for free doesn't necessarily mean that from a value standpoint, the campaign didn't quote unquote spend more money. Yeah, they didn't outlay more cash, but Trump's focus on attacks and doing things that, garnered free media attention, those, I mean, to his credit, right, from a strategy standpoint, very smart. Because why spend the money on ads if you can get organic coverage that costs you nothing other than, the rallies that you already plan to do and so forth. So I think the story this year becomes, Lance, right, it's changed some in that a lot of the coverage he's getting is about for example, him specifically, right? And his administration, because now he's the president. So it is a little different, right? When you're running for president, yeah, it's kind of about you, but it's also a lot about what you're saying and what you can put out there as ideas. That's not as much the focus this time around, right? We don't have these nice big promises for the next 4 years about, building the wall and some of these things that I think originally sounded real good to people in principle, right? To a lot of people, obviously. But in reality, now you've been the president, now you have a track record, and now your opponent criticizes you based on your record, as opposed to before you had no record. You had a record outside of politics, but you had no political record. So I think there's a lot of those dynamics that have changed. And that to me has been part of the story behind this ad spending is, it looks like hopefully Democrats have learned from a few of their mistakes in 2016. At the same time, it looks like the Trump campaign is trying to follow a relatively similar strategy. At least that's the feeling I get.
In this article, most of the money being spent is on TV ads. So are they going after the older voters? Because I think back to Barack Obama in 2008, and he came up with that really cool idea of putting things out on the internet and getting people to donate $5 and $10 and reaching the young voter. And I don't hear that now. And I'm wondering, I know they're battling over the older people with healthcare and the COVID concerns and Social Security and, pre-existing conditions and all those kinds of things. But it's interesting that I don't see anything in this article about what's going on with the young people and where are they going? Because, it's like I talked to the Devon creature and I talk about, commercials I'm watching on TV. And he's like, what are you talking about TV? What do you mean a commercial? Because he streams everything. So the Devon creature has no clue what's happening on TV. So how much?
No clue. None at all.
So how much of this money is being wasted, or spent on a very small group of voters? Because, not just the Devon creature, but, my millennial daughters don't necessarily consume television the way I do. They don't consume, entertainment media the way I do. And so that was one of the, sidebar questions I had, with the many voices talking to me in my head as I read the article is, well, you're not even, if you're spending money on quote traditional television, what audience are you reaching?
It's a great question, Lance. I think it's one that is worth answering. And if people expect to get an answer, they'll have to keep it here on The State of Us. And we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
I'd just like to say, I think we need a way, Lance, to get our audience to be able to see the Devon creature so that, like, not us, they don't need to see us, but just like a live stream of the Devon creature while we're recording so that every time that something's said about him, people can just see the reactions and they don't have to hear from him.
No, but see, that's the mystery. We've talked about
revealing the identity.
Yeah. We don't want to reveal the identity. Maybe we've got that marketing campaign idea of t-shirts of just an orange t-shirt with a silhouette and
black silhouette.
Can you spot the Devon creature? Because if we live stream, we give that all away because there's just a voice and a description. And I think people need to try to hunt it down. You need to go hunting. It's like Sasquatch and Bigfoot. You got to go hunt for the Devon creature. Can you get a picture? Did the aliens come down and abduct you? Can you get a picture of the Devon creature in their natural environment? What about the way the Devon creature consumes his media?
Yes.
Are you being inundated, Devon, with
political ads?
All these political ads.
Have you been seeing political ads digitally? I have, for the record, just to know. I have been seeing them. On YouTube, I think, is probably the place that I've seen the most.
Yeah, I would say YouTube is the biggest platform I've been on within the last month that I've seen really any ads. Now, I really wish I would see them on like Facebook or Reddit more because those are the other two things that I use the most social media wise. And so I don't really feel like I'm getting much out of that, but also Facebook's algorithm matches ads for you. So maybe that could be another thing. I'm not really sure how that would work, but yeah, I'm not really getting a whole lot unless it's YouTube.
So something interesting here, Lance. I just looked up a piece. We'll link this as well. It's a CNBC article. And it just came out at the beginning of this month. So the story here, right, that we've been talking about in the first segment is that Biden's outspending Trump on TV. Well, there's a counter to that, Lance, and here it is. Trump has dropped TV ad spending in some key states, but he's still pouring money into Facebook. President Trump's campaign has largely gone off the air with TV ads in Ohio, Texas, Iowa, and Nebraska, which he easily won in 2016. But he's outspending Joe Biden with targeted Facebook ads in those states over at least the past week, according to the social media giant's ad tracker. Now, that was the first week of October.
That's a key point that this article doesn't bring up, because if you look at traditionally the way things have been run in the past, then yeah, you have a nice argument that the Democrats have a big advantage here. But if we've learned anything, since Barack Obama's campaign in 2008 and how he used the internet to get young people motivated and to get, the whole idea of that, and Bernie Sanders as well, to get that $5 and $10 contribution from 1 million people and how quickly that adds up. We know that the social media is where you reach at least half the voters in America today. And so are the Democrats making a mistake by taking all of this money and spending it on traditional news outlets to get the message out? Now, it's not if the person you're going after is that boomer like me, because that's where I'm going to see it. That's where if you think you can still sway me to vote one way or the other, if you think my vote is still up in the air, that's where you'd spend the money.
If our audience has ever doubted if Lance is a boomer, rewind the tape, right? The tape here, and you will notice a quote from him: "The social media." So just a side note. I think it's just social media, but maybe if you're a boomer, then it can be the social media.
It's the COVID, it's
yeah.
the Walmart, it's the social media,
the everything.
That's called a determiner. I know most of you probably don't know what that means, but that's an English term. You have a determiner before your statement that uses as an adjective. So we can get into that if you want. I know we don't teach grammar anymore in this country, which is why everybody's grammar is so bad, which is why I always have to correct you guys off here.
Here's the baby boomer point, though, that I think is important, because you touched on it, Lance. It's not just about the people, right, that aren't watching traditional media. It's also about where baby boomers are. And folks, 68% of baby boomers are on Facebook. 68%, almost 7 in 10 baby boomers are on Facebook. So Lance is in the minority here because he's not, but most of his peers are, in fact. And I think that right there tells you a big part of, because what you could immediately say, right, is that, well, Biden's focusing on the old crowd. Well, yeah, but no. Yes, he is, right, by doing traditional TV ad spending, but Trump's still focusing on it. He's going about it in a different way. And as we know, from a lot of the episodes we've done over the past few years, right, you can get way more targeted on Facebook. Lance is talking about breaking it down by county, right, or a few county area with TV. Well, we can target it to a single municipality, a single neighborhood, right? We can really narrow it down on social media, and we can go even deeper than that, because we don't even have to blanket that whole area. We can say we want only people in the city of Urbana that make over X, that are over this age, that are white, that are males, right? I mean, we can do that on Facebook. We can't do that with TV ad spending. We can target it some, but not in that regard. So I think that's a strategy point where I'm still disappointed, Lance, to see that the Democrats, I don't know why, I guess they're allowing that to be the case. If they have more money, they don't need to be outspending the president necessarily on TV, but they sure as heck should be outspending him on social media if they want to win. And to Trump's campaign credit, right? I mean, this was his strategy as well, as we know in 2016, as a lot of his ad dollars were spent digitally, specifically Facebook in particular.
The downside for President Trump, as you pointed out in the first segment, is that his big rallies, quote, aren't as big anymore because of COVID. And the bigger point is nobody's covering them anymore. And I say nobody, but the mainstream media is not covering them. There's the mainstream media is not covering them. Just showing the consistency in my speech there. And that was something in 2016 where he got the free coverage, as you pointed out. He's not getting that now. So that's the big difference in the campaign strategy. The strategy is the same, but the coverage isn't the same. So is the message getting out? But the other question here, and maybe this is for the last segment, does it matter? You voted already. I've voted already. How many Americans have already voted or have already made up their mind and are waiting till election day? And is all this money that's being spent even worthwhile? I mean, is it, I mean, you got it, so I guess you have to spend it, but is there an undecided voter?
And that's part of what we're going to talk about coming up. But I did want to ask before we move to the next segment, we didn't get any clarification from Devin on whose ads have you been seeing?
I've mostly have seen ads for Biden, not anything for Trump, but that's probably because I make my political views very prominent on social media. When they ask for it, I mark it. So because I'm like, I don't even want to bother with it.
So the algorithm only sends you what you want, right?
Yep. They do give you some options in there to like see specific ads, because there's ads that I have like blocked from seeing because like they just either annoy me or I don't align with it and I'm tired of seeing it. And then it stops like from giving me similar ads. So it just kind of snowballed into me not really seeing a lot.
See, every so often, Lance, they put this little thing up before you watch a YouTube video that's like it's like a survey basically. And they ask you, one or two questions before you watch the video about yourself. Now, you can choose to skip it, but I think what Devin's communicating is that he has indeed indicated that a few times. And I usually opt to skip it. So I have seen ads for both, but in my experience, I have seen more ads for Trump than I have for Biden. And I don't know if something about what I'm watching indicates that, or if it's just because I don't complete the survey. I don't know. I'm not sure why, but I have seen ads for both. But I also always skip the survey. So as soon as I'm allowed to, because they make you wait a few minutes.
Well, this is a different episode, but what are we going to do with these young people who are limiting themselves to seeing both sides of the argument through these algorithms? Because, I mean, Devin is intelligent enough that he realizes it's going on. So he can go out there and seek the other side because he knows he's only getting one side. But how many people out there watching YouTube videos or Reddit or whatever they're using to get their information don't even realize they're only getting one side of things based on what their searches are and what it is they're watching? That's the scary part to me. And I know that's another show, but just listening to that and understanding more and more how these algorithms work on Facebook and in social media, that how many people don't even realize they're not getting both sides of the story, which to me is the key to being an informed voter and a better citizen.
No matter where we watch our ads, Lance, right? Whether it's the Devin creature filling out the survey on YouTube and seeing those hand-served ads, or whether it's you on your old people shows and getting your classic TV ad coming through, I'm Joe Biden and I approve this message sort of thing. Whatever it might be, the question remains, does any of it matter? Whether it's on social media, on terrestrial TV, does any of it make a difference? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
More than 35 million Americans have voted with 2 weeks until Election Day. More than 35 million. Now, that far surpasses past year's early vote numbers. But I think part of the story here, and this is from CNBC again, part of the story here, Lance, is these aren't necessarily new voters, right? The coverage on this has driven me crazy the past few weeks because the mainstream media is just hammering the early vote turnout. Look at all these people voting early. Yeah, but if no new people show up to vote, or if less people total show up to vote on Election Day, right, then great. They voted early. But remember, voting early doesn't change anything about, how your votes counted per se. I mean, they're all still supposed to be counted the same way. So, you voted early, right? But if you were going to vote on election day and you voted early, I guess it's nice that you voted early, but, how important is that? I'm not sure, because again, what really matters is total overall turnout. If total overall turnout is the same or less, right, than it was in 2016, then really all this statistics and data about this early voting is kind of irrelevant. Yes, Democrats have dominated vote by mail, but Republicans are starting to make up the ground, especially with in-person early voting. So a lot of this, a lot of states have this. Ohio's one of them, Lance, and I experienced it the other day. I had requested an absentee ballot, so had Brett. We filled them out. I was taking them back, and not because I don't love the United States Postal Service, but it's my vote. It's important enough that I didn't want to mail it. I just didn't want to risk, there's plenty of time. It probably would have been fine. And if people chose to mail it in, that's fine. But I wanted to take it to the drop box because it's only, 5 minutes from my house. So it just wasn't a big deal to do it that way and save the postage. So I take it in and go to the drop box, and there's a line. And when I say a line, Lance, I mean, I don't know, there were 15 or 20 people in line for early voting. Because you can vote early in person, for example, in Champaign County, Ohio, where we are, at the Board of Elections in person. And all those people, they had their, they were wearing masks, they were in line, they were waiting to vote. And I walked right in, stuck my envelope in the drop box, and walked out. I didn't have to wait in a line or anything. So I think that's the other side of this is, a lot of these people, if they're concerned about vote by mail, they just may show up and vote early in person.
I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's interesting that there are so many people voting early, and I did the same thing you did, but just this week. So I did it a week after you and had the same experience. There were a number of people, double-digit number of people standing in line to vote in person, even though at the time, we were more than 2 weeks away from the election. What matters is the total number of votes that are cast. Doesn't matter whether they were voted on early, voted in person, voted absentee, whether they were dropped off, whether they were mailed. So it doesn't matter how you do it. It's nice that everybody's doing it, but it doesn't tell us how many people are going to be voting in this election, and that's where you got to have a story. So you got to talk about it, and unfortunately it really doesn't even matter how many people do it. It just matters if, which candidate wins what state by one vote to get the Electoral College votes. Not to get on that horse again, but doggone it, folks, we got to get rid of the Electoral College before the next election, because this just isn't right for either side. I'm not campaigning, as if you haven't listened to that episode, go back into the files and find it, because we have had both political parties in the last 20 years talk about getting rid of the Electoral College. So this isn't a Democrat or Republican issue. This is, let's get back to what the founding fathers really wanted, even for you originalists in the Constitution. They're, well, this is what the founding fathers wanted. No, it's not. Read the book, listen to the show. We need to get rid of the Electoral College so that it is one person, one vote, which is what we all think it is, but in reality, it's not. So, but you still got to get out and vote. Don't not vote. And I think, that's really the big thing too, not to change paths too much, but it's interesting that, the Democrats are saying, hey, we haven't won anything yet. You need to get out there and still vote. Don't think because you're right. The media is out there saying, oh, look at all these early votes and no, the election's almost over. And the Biden campaign is saying nobody's won anything yet. You got to get out and vote. And the president on his behalf is saying, hey, we haven't lost anything yet. We're winning. There's still lots of time to vote. Get out there and vote, and we're going to win this sucker. And so to stop now and say, oh, it's over, so I'm not even going to go bother to vote, that's not the way to do it, people. No matter who you're supporting, you got to get out and vote. Your vote still matters under the rules of the game that we're playing right now. It doesn't matter as much as it could if we didn't have the Electoral College, but it still matters. And both sides are still claiming that we needed you to get out there to vote to win this election. So hopefully we'll see the number of people turning out to vote in record numbers. I mean, as a history person, as a political person, that'd be awesome. That's what it's supposed to be. Quit letting a small group of people choose who's going to govern you.
Votes cast by mail and in person, so early votes this election cycle, have reached 25.5% of the more than 136 million total ballots that were cast in the 2016 presidential election. So yeah, it's a lot more because by October 23rd of 2016, only 5.9 million Americans had voted early. So it's way ahead of, 35 million versus 5.9 million. Way more people have voted early this year. But again, it's only 1/4 of the total turnout for 2016. So you're not even talking about half of the turnout yet that's occurred. So there's a lot of ground to go, and I think that point's well taken, Lance. The interesting part of all this, though, is right. Do the ads make any difference to the people that are yet to vote? Obviously, those of us, myself, Lance included, who have already voted, they can show us these ads all they want, but they're wasting their money because, it really, there's nothing that we can do, even if one of the candidates just died or something, right? Obviously, hopefully that doesn't happen, but if they did, we're voting for somebody who's dead because, there's nothing we can do to change our vote at this point, even if we wanted to. So it is what it is in that regard. But that's another interesting thing this year, I think, is what percentage of money is being wasted, right? Because one of the targeting methods is targeting likely voters. Well, there's not a great way to distinguish whether or not somebody's already voted. So you've got 35 million people, a quarter of the voting population, regular voting population, that has already voted. That a lot of these campaigns, like they're spending money on me the past few weeks, it can't do any good, right? So that raises the question all told, right? If we spend all this money on these campaigns, most of that's on advertising, does it make a difference? And here's, I guess, my quick answer. After watching the aftermath of the 2016 election, I sincerely believe that digital-based advertising and digital-based strategy, and this is key, coupled with digital advertising can have a real impact. I do not believe that ads in and of themselves make a huge difference. I think when coupled with very specific targeting and coupled with very systematic and strategic deployment of digital media tactics like what Cambridge Analytica was doing, those things, I believe, have the ability to change people's perception. And the reason it works, folks, is because you don't know that your perception is being changed. One of the reasons that ads are not terribly effective, and research shows this, Lance and I covered it a number of times, is because when somebody comes up to you and says, I'm going to change your mind, the immediate thing, doesn't matter what it is, right? The immediate thing is you're going to recoil from that and you're going to be like, oh, no, you're not going to change my mind. It, again, doesn't matter what they're selling. Doesn't matter what it is. That's just human nature, is to resist that being told, right, that you're going to change your mind or perceiving that that's what's about to happen. So I think that, especially when it's not a human to human connection, right? We know that canvassing can have an effect if you have a conversation with people versus if you just show up and say, vote for this person. But ads are even worse in that regard because there is no conversation. It's basically just, a bullhorn, screaming at people.
It's a one-sided conversation.
Exactly.
It's not a real conversation. I think you're right. I think it's how can you to blanket the airwaves with ads? And the article talked just very quickly about how national ads are somewhat cheaper right now because the Senate races have driven up local ads. But again, as we've talked about, and it's not a national election. I scream at my TV every time I have a news pundit tell me, well, in the latest national poll, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. Who cares? You just wasted your breath and you wasted money doing that because it's not a national election. It's 50 individual state elections plus Washington, D.C. So I think your point of targeting your money, your campaign dollars is the key. And you're even more spot on when you talk about doing it digitally. I think that is where you get the biggest bang for your buck. And to answer your question just quickly, because I know we're about out of time, on my end, I don't think it's changing a lot of people's minds. I think this is, in this particular election, I think most people have already made up their minds. In other elections, you maybe could be spending money and still swaying people. I'm not sure there are too many people out there to be swayed. I think people are pretty set on who they are supporting.
Perhaps the biggest argument, right? Take Ohio, for example, this year. There's a decent chance that Ohio could go for Biden. All you people out there living in Ohio who have cast your vote for Trump already or are planning to, if Ohio goes blue, your vote didn't count. Just to be clear, it did not count, right? It wasn't counted. Or you could look at it and say you were forced to vote for Joe Biden. Let that settle in, right? And you don't have to be in Ohio. Anywhere, if you're in a state where it's likely or possible that it'll go blue and it does go blue and you voted for Trump, your vote didn't count. Or you could look at it and say you were forced to vote for Joe Biden. Let yourself think about that, because that is the effect, right, of the Electoral College, is whether whoever you're voting for, if you're in a state and it goes the opposite way of the way you thought it would, your vote didn't matter. That at the end of the day, right, it had no effect. And that in our democracy, I think, is perhaps one of the biggest things that we have to take on and talk about. That said, there's still time for your state to go a different way, right? And showing up and voting is the only way that you have a chance of making it go the way you want. So please do go vote. Vote.org. Easy to find election tools there, where to vote. Make sure you're registered, that it's up to date. And find information about early voting, whether that's in person or by mail. There's still time for all of that. So please take time to do it. Lance, why do we have this conversation today? What are we trying to do here at True Chat, the company that produces The State of Us?
We have a mission statement here, and our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And that's why we had the conversation, is that we tried to be respectful, bring up both sides, and have a good, honest discussion of the issue that we had on the show today. So I think we did that, and hopefully we did that very well. If you learned something, please share it with your family and friends, because we want this conversation to be bigger than just the three of us. You know, you, Justin, myself, and you, the listener. We need you to take this out to other people. And if they say, well, where are you getting all this really cool stuff? You know, where are you getting this cool information? Well, you need to let people know about us. And you can do that by saying, well, you can find these guys. They have a podcast, and you can find them on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is released by 4 a.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays in the Eastern Time Zone. And The State of Us is also a syndicated radio program available on the weekends in numerous markets across the United States. So check your local talk station, see if The State of Us is there. If not, give them a call, tell them, hey, you need to carry this program. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson, and a big shout out to the Huron Middle School students who are getting their current events from us. Way to go.
Thank you to our recording producer, Devin McCain, editing producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you to all of our listeners. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. Thestateofus.org.